Welcome to another episode of Raven Conversations. I'm Joe C. Mandel, State Public Affairs Officer for the Washington National Guard. And today I'm joined by Brian Terbush. He works for the Emergency Management Division here on Camp Murray. And you are a volcanologist, which focuses on the study of volcanoes.
That's correct.
And you're here to tell us kind of about our volcanoes here in the state of Washington. May is Volcano Awareness Month, correct? And answer some questions about, how volcanoes work, kind of the science behind them, and then kind of the different eruptions and how people can be prepared. I appreciate you coming on, Brian.
No problem. I'm always happy to talk about volcanoes. So.
Yeah. So real quick for those at home, kind of your background, how'd you get into being a volcanologist?
Yeah, so I was really lucky to get to travel a lot as a kid. My parents took me all over the U.S. just to kind of see everything. Eventually that led to looking at rocks, realizing they're pretty cool if you look at them. If you get to see things like Yellowstone and like arches and canyonlands in Utah. And then I realized you can be a geologist. That led to me being a geologist, studying that underground in upstate New York. And I said, hey, you know what? These rocks, they're really not exploding enough, which kind of led to that whole thing. I was very interested in earthquakes and volcanoes, and I just wanted to learn more about these and why they do what they do, how they work, and what we can do about them is really the big thing. I want to make sure it comes back to hazard mitigation. So I found a master's degree that allowed me to travel to Guatemala, to Ecuador, to Japan, and study the volcanoes there and learn about how people live with them. And I'm really lucky to have fallen into a career where I can work in the hazard mitigation for volcanoes.
Yeah. So you kind of answered my question, like, what is it about volcanoes that's interesting, right?
Yeah, I mean, mountains are fascinating. You see the place they occupy in our culture, in our skyline of the state. You just look outside, you can't help but notice these. And again, just add explosions, and you've got... Yeah, they're pretty fascinating. It's really hard to ignore them.
Yeah. So you mentioned Washington State, and obviously we have a ton of mountains here in many volcanoes, right? I mean, our skyline, you can't not see Mount Rainier, and it's an active volcano.
Yeah.
Can you kind of talk about the mountains here in Washington and the volcanoes that we've had?
Sure. So in Washington, we have 5 active volcanoes. Want everybody to know that. They're not erupting right now, but they're all in a state of just add magma, is how I like to put it, and how the USGS Cascades Volcano Observatory, who studies them, who monitors them really closely to make sure they're not doing anything currently.
Yeah. So what's at magma mean?
Just add magma, I'm saying. Okay. So they've erupted before. They can again. They have those pathways. But we need molten rock to come up through the crust. Mm-hmm. And if that enters the body of the volcano, it could lead to an eruption. Yeah. It won't necessarily, but it could again. Yeah. So that's why we consider them active. They've all erupted multiple times in the past 10,000 years. So they could again as soon as that comes into the volcanic body.
Yeah. So the 5 are, Baker, Rainier, Adams, St. Helens, and then what's the 5th one? Is it Glacier Peak?
It's Glacier Peak.
Yeah, and then Hood as well. I mean, we count Hood as one of those as well.
Yeah, Oregon's got a bunch of active volcanoes too.
Yeah.
Try just to focus on the ones in Washington, but we got some in Northern California that are also part of the Cascades. Lassen and Mount Shasta. And then there's a couple up in Vancouver as well, or in British Columbia, sorry.
Yeah. So in the Pacific Northwest, how many total active volcanoes?
That's one that, there are a number. So the USGS, the number I know off the top of my head, the USGS monitors 161 active volcanoes in the U.S.
Wow.
A lot of those are in Alaska and the Aleutian Islands. That's another subduction zone, very similar to that. Some are in California. We have the Yellowstone volcano. There's a couple in Nevada, and then they also monitor the central Mariana Islands, Guam. They watch those as well.
Okay.
So and Hawaii.
So here in the state, obviously, we have 5 active volcanoes. What's kind of the eruption history? I know we have a graphic we can share with folks to kind of see, but if you want to kind of talk about that.
Well, as you can see with the graphic when we share that, it's each of those little volcanoes on the graphic in the past 4,000 years, and there's a line that shows the past 200 years as well. That just shows that all of our volcanoes are active. Each of those volcanoes represents a period of activity, so it's not just one and done. These volcanoes could have erupted during that time for, say, 6 months, a couple years, maybe just a couple months, or it might have just been one explosion. These are all found by looking at the deposits and doing different types of dating to find out when they occurred, or even just looking at one is on top of the other that shows that the one that was lower happened before. Yeah. So they can learn all of this just by looking at deposits that the volcano left behind.
Yeah. So So I think one of the questions that you probably could answer as a volcanologist and someone who's a study of volcanoes is what makes a mountain a volcano? We have mountains, but that aren't volcanoes, but we have, mountains that are volcanoes. So what makes it a volcano?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the secret is magma. It's not going to be a volcano unless you get magma moving up through the crust. And it needs to be able to have a vent where it can escape to the surface. Yeah. Magma that reaches the surface is called lava. Might be more familiar with that term. But really we're sitting on the Cascadia subduction zone. As that plate goes underneath the plate we're sitting on, the North American plate, it lets off a bit of water. And that's just something that's contained in the minerals. As it heats up, as it dives into the mantle, it acts as a flux. It makes the mantle easier to melt, which makes that melt buoyant. It moves up through the crust really slowly. Yeah. It takes hundreds of years for this to happen. So, but it's only going to escape in these certain areas, and it's only likely to escape in places it's broken through the crust before. It's just going to find the path of least resistance, which is part of the reason it's so important to monitor these volcanoes, because right now they don't have much magma in them. They're not ready to erupt. They're considered normal background activity. We know they're active. We get lots of earthquakes at Mount Rainier every year, but that's just normal for Mount Rainier. But as soon as magma starts moving up through the crust, it's got to break rock to get to the surface, because it's been a little while since it's been there. Yeah. See, over 100 years since Mount Rainier's last eruption.
So when that last erupted, what kind of eruption was that?
So not completely sure on exactly what it did. The type of lava we have at these mountains is a lot different than the kind you see in Hawaii. It's a type of lava called andesite, named after the Andes, the chain of mountains that you can say kind of extends from the Rockies if you're really looking, but all the way down into central South America. But this lava is really sticky. It flows very slowly compared to what you see in Hawaii. That was, in some cases, moving 15 miles an hour during that eruption in 2018. That's really fast. That's like a lava river. Comparing that to when I was in Mexico, I was tracking some of these lava flow studies on a volcano called Fuego de Colima. And some of those would move about less than a kilometer a day. So very slowly compared. It's more like toothpaste compared to like molasses, if you want to say.
Okay.
Hawaii.
So we've got ones that kind of erupt and they have lava. Then you had a Mount St. Helens type eruption in 1980 that was kind of a blast out the side. Can you kind of explain the differences between why that did that, but then why other ones have like a lava flow?
Yeah. So all volcanoes can potentially have explosive or effusive eruptions, kind of whether the lava just kind of explodes and fractures, or whether it just kind of flows out, again, like that toothpaste, or maybe like the molasses, like water as it comes out, versus just exploding. And the big difference is gas. There's always gas trapped in lava. A lot of it is actually water vapor. That's the most common one. Now, the thing is, when you heat up water and it turns to steam, it expands about 1,000 times. So you can get that fuel-coolant interaction. But the key is that gas expanding. It's like a soda bottle is the big thing. You have the bottle, you have all the gas in there. You take off the top that allows that gas to escape. And it does it. It expands. It moves out really quickly. Yeah. So one of the big differences between them is how easily that gas is able to escape. When you have the lava flowing nicely, like in Hawaii, or if we have a current lava flow coming out of one of our volcanoes, or very similar to Mount St. Helens in 2004, you just kind of got this dome pushing out of there. The gas was able to come out of there really easily, so it just nicely flowed. You still got a couple little explosions in that time, but a lot of that happens when it's kind of capped.
Yeah. So kind of what you're saying is in 1980, there was nowhere for that gas to go out of Mount St. Helens, and that's what caused that eruption basically out the side.
Yeah. So there's some debate currently. Well, it's been going on for a while, of course, since about 1980. Put a bunch of volcanologists in a room, and they're going to argue. Yeah. But the data shows different things. And so one of the things there is, did an earthquake trigger that eruption? Or was the earthquake actually just a landslide that was very big? Because if you watch the videos of the mountain erupting, you see that the whole side just sloughs off. Now that's more like, rather than taking the cap off your soda bottle, just like hacking right through the side with a machete or something. All the gas that was trapped in that dome and had been for weeks, it was just suddenly able to escape, which caused this huge amount of outpouring of all the gas, of the lava just fracturing into ash. So ash is little tiny pieces of lava. Contains a lot of quartz, a lot of silica. It's not the same as ash that we have in the air in the summer here.
Yeah.
Very different. But yeah, that's kind of the big difference. And a
Yeah.
lot of that is, I mean, if you're looking at USGS, following them on Facebook, on Twitter right now, what they're doing that's really exciting is sharing what was happening on this day at Mount St. Helens 43 years ago, back in 1980.
Yeah, I know they've tagged us a few times to talk about the guard coming in. And
Yes.
yeah.
So that's really cool to see. But it's this whole combination of the thing we want people to know about this is volcanic unrest. It's not just this one explosion that happens. This started back in late March, early April. And there were even just explosions happening at the top of at the summit of the mountain. It had a crater at one point.
Yeah.
And that's where people focused on what they thought the volcano was going to do.
So you probably get this question a lot, being a person that's in the field. When is a volcanic eruption going to happen? It sounds like they're completely unpredictable, but you probably get that question still a lot.
That is a very good question. When will the volcano erupt? When will the earthquake erupt? And again, it's just add magma. We don't really know what a volcano is going to do, even once there's magma in it. But that's why monitoring is so important.
Yeah.
So the USGS, the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network, when that magma starts moving through the mountain, it's going to break that rock. It's going to cause seismic signals. It's going to cause GPS signals. They have to monitor it that way, because if you put that in there, it's going to blow up like a balloon. Really, really hard to perceive. But actually, in 1980, when it was preparing for that eruption, you could see the North Dome move by several feet per day. It was very noticeable.
Yeah. So what can folks do? In the meantime, right? I mean, there's not an eruption. We don't know. We can't. They're very unpredictable still. But what can people do to be prepared?
Yeah. So since it's currently a time where the volcanoes are all in a normal state, at least I hope so. But between the time when this is recorded and the time this goes out. Normal just means it's a great time to learn about your volcano. So we have some hazard maps we can share. Find your local volcano. Just because there is a huge mountain on the horizon doesn't necessarily mean it's going to impact your life in a bad way. I talk to a lot of people in Seattle who think, oh, Mount Rainier erupts, that means I'm doomed. No, not directly. There are very specific volcanic hazards, and we know this because the geologists who study them see time and time again this is what the volcano has done.
Yeah.
So they've done that too. They've taken that information and turned it into hazard maps.
Yeah.
So we want you to study your local hazard maps, understand what they mean. The big hazard looking at our volcanoes, they're all covered in a lot of snow.
Yeah.
It's something called lahars. Do you know where that word comes from?
It's like the ice glaciers that are on top, and the lahars is where they flow down, right, when they melt?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we saw those in Mount St. Helens, and the big thing is they took out 27 bridges, and those didn't happen right with the eruption either. This was like 4 hours later when the huge piece of mountain, all the glaciers that were on it started to melt from the eruption. And just all this water picked up all this debris, and it takes everything with it. It's just a fast-moving slurry of liquid concrete. You cannot be in the way and expect to survive if this comes through.
Yeah.
And we keep building in areas where these lahars have come through in the past. We see that in some of our river valleys in Washington. So I'm not telling you to stop building there, not to live there. It's a beautiful place to live. The thing is, if you live there, you have to know how you're going to get alerted when a lahar is coming.
Yeah, and there are maps that say which lahars are where and that kind of stuff. So it's out there for public to see too, which is
absolutely. So the USGS has those. Our Washington Department of Natural Resources Geological Survey. They've got a nice interactive map on their geology portal, so you can type in your address, type in your work address, school addresses, things like that, and just see if those intersect with a hazard map, or maybe if the route to get there does. The other thing with those hazard maps, if you look at them, it's like all these red, orange, and yellow areas moving away from the volcano. Doesn't mean that during an eruption, all of those areas are going to fill up with mud.
Yeah.
But you need to know if you're in one of those valleys, how you're going to be alerted.
Yeah.
It's really similar to flash flood warnings in that way for most of our volcanoes. Mount Rainier actually has a lahar warning system, those sirens out in the valley. And those sirens can alert you about other things, but really the main thing is if they go off, we need people to evacuate.
Yeah. And then you brought the proclamation with you.
Yes.
May is Volcano Preparedness or Awareness Month. And we can definitely put it on the screen so everybody can read it. But this is a month that actually you guys it's dedicated to you guys and what you guys do with volcanoes.
Well, not just us.
Yeah.
We want everybody to be aware of their volcano hazards, and we know that the National Guard has been a huge help in the past. When it erupts, it's making sure that we can get people out of there, search and rescue in those lahar areas, help keep areas secure. The thing is, if you look at those hazard maps too, there's this kind of pink area around the mountains, and that represents these near volcano hazards. These are the kind you see in disaster movies, those big clouds of doom coming down the mountain, which is a real thing called pyroclastic flows. And a lot of times if you watch, you see news reports recently, like Mount Merapi in Indonesia had some of these that are really big, and they can reach populated areas.
Yeah.
We're fortunate a lot of ours are stuck within national parks, within national forests, so we can close those really easily. But I want people to understand, if that area is closed, it's for your protection.
Yeah.
And because those hazards are so unpredictable, when a volcano is in a state of unrest, when there is magma in it, the things that's going to do, whether it's going to have those pyroclastic flows, whether it's going to have just explosions. We had that in New Zealand a couple of years ago as well. There's a really good documentary about it. But that volcano had magma in it, and it touched some water near the surface. And that explosion was devastating and tragic. We want you to stay out of these areas in that state of unrest to avoid getting into situations like that. It's for your safety, because you really can't predict exactly when or where on the volcano something like that will happen when there's magma in it.
Yeah.
So near volcano hazard zones, if they're closed, please stay out for your safety. But those lahar areas, again, it won't go down every river when that snow starts to melt, when it's erupting.
Yeah.
But you need to know how you're going to get alerted.
Yeah. So I think my last question, and it's always an interesting topic. I think it was the summer of '97. We had 2 volcano movies come out.
Oh, of course.
Dante's Peak fan or Volcano fan?
I got to admit, I have not actually watched Volcano yet. But we had fun last year. We did a live tweet on Twitter with our Washington Shakeout account and a couple of our volcanologists. And this year, we're actually, we watched Dante's Peak last year and kind of went through and looked at all the different things that happen. This year, I will finally get to watch Volcano, because we're planning to do that same thing and watch along. So, yeah, you're welcome to join us. Tweet along, watch the movie. We're going to be pointing out the inconsistencies, what lava is doing that lava doesn't do, things like that. It should be a lot of fun. We're looking forward to that. Always looking for new ways to get people to learn about their volcano hazards and but what they can do about them, really. Yeah.
Anything else you want to add?
I guess I would just say it's Volcano Awareness Month. Be aware, but if you're not signed up for your local alerts yet, that's a really important thing to do. So there's a couple ways you can get alerted about volcanoes. On our mil.wa.gov/alerts page, we have a lot of them compiled. You want to have your wireless emergency alerts turned on. Even if they've woken you up in the middle of the night one time and you turned them off because you were annoyed, they're much better to have than not to have. Sorry if you get woken up. We also have the USGS has a volcano notification service, and highly recommend that as one of the first sources. It's free. It'll send things to your email. They'll have a lot of detail about what's going on. Most of what we have with our volcanoes are just going to be information statements. It's, hey, we noticed something. One that came out last year was, we've been watching the Three Sisters in Oregon, and we noticed that this one area of land increased, it raised by about 1 inch over a period of 6 months.
Yeah.
So you get things like that, but it's just a really good awareness that they're watching.
Fascinating.
But you're also going to get things like if the volcano starts to not be normal in its behavior. The watching it is very much like going for regular doctor visits.
Yeah.
If you watched it for a number of years, you know when something's wrong, so that's really important. And then finally, I will just say sign up for local alerts, those emergency alerts. You can get them for your county, and we have a good list on mil.wa.gov/alerts. So.
No, that's good to know. I appreciate that, Brian. And if you're interested in learning more about volcanoes, we can definitely put the information in the notes. If you like the video, give us a like, comment, and subscribe for more of our videos. And thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.